Working at a candy store with a strict policy allowing only service animals, I had become well-versed in discerning legitimate service animals from mere pets. This knowledge was particularly important to me since my late dog, Bella, had been a service dog for my mother. I had taken the time to educate myself on the intricacies of ADA laws, enabling me to easily identify genuine service animals and spot the ones that were falsely claimed. Dealing with individuals attempting to pass off fake service animals was something I took very seriously, and my patience wore thin when they insisted on arguing with me. Today, a lady entered the store, cradling her dog in a blanket. Instantly, I recognized that it wasn't a service dog. "Excuse me, ma'am, but we only allow service dogs in the store," I informed her. "She is a service dog," she retorted defensively. "Curious," I asked. "Then what specific tasks does she perform?" "Emotional support," she replied. Regretfully, I explained, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but emotional support animals are not protected by the ADA and are not considered service animals. I'm unable to serve you." Furious, she erupted into a fit of rage, hurling threats to sue me and summon the authorities. My response remained firm. For what? Refusing service to someone who is falsely claiming their pet as a service animal. Just so you know, in X state, that carries a civil penalty fine of up to $250 each time. Feel free to call the police. I'll be right here. Silenced by my firm stance, she left the store in a huff. Thankfully, the situation de-escalated without further incident. P.S. It is essential to remember that non-pet-friendly stores are not appropriate places to bring untrained pets. Moreover, falsely representing a pet as a service animal only creates additional challenges for those who genuinely rely on them. I first got to college my freshman year and met the dorm leader, RA, at most schools. Like most colleges, the dorm leader was the upperclassman that lived in the dorms and monitored the freshman halls. My dorm leader's name was Julio. Fake name, by the way, and at first he seemed like a nice dude that minded his own business. He talked about how he would stay out of everyone's business if we would stay out of his. Also, he tried to be the cool dorm leader and always mentioned to me about how he drank tons of alcohol his freshman year in the dorms. He gave off the impression he really didn't care if we ever drank in our dorm rooms, but to just keep it on the low if we did. I really didn't drink much at all, but I appreciated the fact he seemed pretty normal and didn't try to rat on kids. During the last week of October of my freshman year of college, I had one of the hardest weeks of my academic career. I was a biochemistry major taking some pretty tough classes and had 3 exams that week. At the end of the week, a friend I had recently made down the hall invited me to his dorm room to watch an upcoming NBA game. As we were watching the game, he had a bottle of vodka and gave some to the guys in the dorm. Being a naive and stupid freshman kid just trying to make some friends, I took 1 shot of vodka and continued to watch the game. As we're watching the game, one of the guys in the dorm spills a bottle of soda and rushes to the bathroom to grab some paper towel. As he walked out of the dorm room, Julio walked by and noticed the bottle of vodka. He laughed and said something of the sort of, "I remember when I was a freshman, haha, just try and keep it down." We thanked him and told him to have a good night. It seemed like a normal conversation and nothing out of the ordinary. 30 minutes later, we heard a knock on the door and 2 policemen showed up with breathalyzers. They told us they had received a complaint from Julio about underage drinking and a party being thrown in the dorm room. Remember, it was 3 guys watching a Lakers game on a Thursday night at 8 p.m. I ended up getting a minor in consumption charge for blowing a 02, had to do 20 hours community service, a reflection journal, and appear to the Judicial Affairs Center at my college about my supposed drinking problem. I'm not blaming the officer for giving me a ticket, but I was pretty upset that Julio, who always talked about getting drunk during his freshman year in the dorm, called the police right after he essentially gave us the okay for the night. A few weeks later, I saw Julio and Straight Up, asked him why he decided to rat me out. Specifically, I asked why he didn't just tell me to head back to my dorm if he had a problem with the alcohol instead of calling the police right after our conversation. He responds word for word with "You made a decision and had to suffer the consequences of that decision." After that incident, I never really talked to him, but he always tried to be buddy-buddy when he saw me in the hallway. Anyway, I eventually left the dorms and moved off campus for my sophomore year. I had decided to rush a fraternity my freshman year and ended up meeting some really nice guys. I have never been the fraternity type, but I went to a smaller college where fraternities are a lot different than most places. During the second semester of my sophomore year, my fraternity was taking a new pledge class. One day I received a text from Julio saying one of the guys pledging your fraternity has been caught dealing alcohol to another freshman in the dorms. I thought I would let you know. Turns out Julio was the dorm leader for a freshman pledging my fraternity and ratted him out to judicial affairs as well, thinking the term dealing alcohol was the lamest, funniest thing I have ever heard. I sent that to our fraternity GroupMe and everyone laughed about it. About a week later, that kid pledging our fraternity came up to me asking about the message I received from Julio. Essentially, a pretty similar thing happened to him like what happened to me. Julio found out he had given another kid in the dorm a bottle of wine and reported it to the police. This kid ended up getting a minor in possession and had to speak with judicial affairs. This is where the story gets hilarious. In his meeting with judicial affairs, the kid pledging our fraternity told them that his dorm leader, Julio was now a senior at this point, had texted me about the charges pending against him. Apparently, it's a huge violation to discuss pending charges against a freshman in your dorm to a third party. The judicial affairs guy told him that if he could prove Julio was discussing this charge with a third party, aka me, he would receive severe sanctions. Basically, if I sent that text to the judicial affairs people, Julio would be in big trouble, so ended up sending them that text that night. After that, I didn't hear anything about what happened to Julio and had honestly forgotten about it. However, nearing the end of the school year in my sophomore year, I saw Julio at the dining hall and came up to speak to me. He tells me a story about how he knows I was the one who ratted him to judicial affairs, how he ended up getting fired from his dorm leader position, lost the scholarship money his dorm leader job provided him, and overall how bad his life has been since he got fired. After going through his entire sob story, he asked me, "Why did you do that? This could have been handled completely differently. I didn't have to get fired and I could have kept my scholarship money." I looked him dead in the eye for what seemed like 30 seconds and said, "Julio, you made a decision and had to suffer the consequences of that decision." Let's go back a few years. I was a combat engineer platoon sergeant. We had recently gotten a new company commander who thought his crap didn't stink. My first interaction with him was when I got back from running an M240B range, where I was told he wanted to speak to all leadership immediately in the conference room. Well, it took 3 hours for him to arrive, and despite one SG calling many times, he insisted we stay. The entire meeting was him bragging about himself and saying that he was trying to get the company slotted for a deployment to the Middle East as well as how excited he was to go. I spoke up and basically said he's a jerk, but with more words which ended the meeting, which got me a stern talking to and thinly veiled threats. This captain had been in for 15 years and never once been deployed. That takes effort and a lot of figurative sucking up. He only wanted to go now because he was up for major. It turned out the brigade had a mission and asked for volunteers. Captain Jerk volunteered me to go despite knowing I had gotten married a week earlier. I made it very clear I did not want to go to the higher-ups. I was told it was between myself and the captain. Well, a month out, my sister-in-law had passed away. Well, Captain Jerk didn't care, gave me no leave, and I was still to leave about a week after the funeral. Screw him. I walked in to talk to the command sergeant major and was immediately dropped from the deployment. But the captain was always sucking up to the battalion commander, so nothing happened to him. About 8 months later, Captain Jerk got his wish. Headquarters, platoon, and one other was slotted to deploy. Of course, because I had the most combat experience and most deployments in the platoon, he naturally decided that's why my platoon should go. Now, in order to deploy, you first have to go to a month-long field exercise where you are graded on performance. This generally applies to the higher levels of leadership. By this time, I was just angry, so I got my squad leaders together and improvised a few missions. First, everyone was to follow the CPT's instructions as literally as possible, no matter how dumb, and not to give any advice. This led us to getting absolutely destroyed in training, which was glorious. Secondly, and most importantly, was the psychological aspect. So, This jerk commander would go to bed nightly at 9 p.m. no matter what. In the deserts of California, you can find all sorts of creepy crawlies to slip in a sleeping bag while sprinkling juice on his uniform. They'd also periodically hide some of his gear or render his rifle inoperable. So for days this went on. Poor guy slept very little because I ensured his tent was set over top of a beehive. These bees hated any vibration and loved juice. The jerk never realized why he was constantly getting stung. As we were to be falling under a new brigade, I had to go meet the higher-ups, and wouldn't you know it, the coal we were set to fall under turned out to have been my first company commander who I got along great with. I pulled him aside and called up my squad leaders, where we basically told him Captain Jerk was going to get someone killed, pointed out his erratic behavior and the overall poor performance. Needless to say, he was quickly relieved of command, career killer, and sent back to work in an office where he belonged. As for myself and my platoon, I still didn't want to go, but the new company commander was my old platoon leader from my second deployment, plus I couldn't let my guys go without me. Turned out it would be my last deployment, as some injuries forced me out of the military, but everyone came back alive. Edit. I sent a text to one of the old squad leaders because, for the life of me, I couldn't remember exactly what the deal was with the captain. He had been an E4 prior to becoming an officer. Clearly, I didn't care enough to retain that information. I am currently employed at a small office where I handle customer service tasks while pursuing my finance degree at university. Last summer, my previous supervisor went on maternity leave, and I was assigned a new superior to oversee my work. Up until that point, I had been successfully performing my job for nearly 2 years. My colleagues consistently praised my performance, noting my low error rate and overall competence. My primary responsibility involves answering customer calls and assisting them with various inquiries, while also managing secondary tasks like handling mail and reviewing application forms. Whenever I encountered a question beyond my expertise, I would transfer the customer to the next level of support, which essentially consisted of my colleagues on temporary contracts. Unfortunately, the person I was paired with turned out to be an excessively aggressive and micromanaging individual. He insisted on sitting beside me for a full 6-hour shift, closely monitoring my interactions with customers, a practice that seemed questionable in terms of legality considering he could hear every conversation. This constant scrutiny made me incredibly nervous, which led to a cautious and hesitant approach to my support duties that day. Despite receiving positive feedback from my other colleagues, he remained convinced that I was incompetent and incapable of providing qualified answers beyond the first level of support. Consequently, my new superior decided that I was not up to par in my role and forbade me from independently providing information without consulting the next level of support, which included him and some other colleagues. In a rather petty act of defiance, I started redirecting every phone call related to his area of expertise directly to his phone over the past few months. Consequently, his workload skyrocketed from handling roughly 2-3 calls per shift to around 20. Furthermore, when he is absent or fails to answer his phone, I make sure that every customer receives his work email address, enabling them to obtain the proper assistance they require. After all, I am apparently too incompetent to provide answers that I have known by heart for the past 2 years. Moreover, as part of his restrictive management style, he also prohibited me from multitasking, such as answering calls while working on application forms. According to him, this practice would increase my error rate, although it has never happened. As a result, I have accumulated a significant amount of overtime. Unfortunately, in the location where I reside, overtime hours are not compensated monetarily but must be taken as time off instead. Consequently, I have accrued enough overtime hours to leave approximately 3 months prior to the end of my contract, effectively using up all my vacation time and overtime. This means that for the final 3 months of my employment, he will be solely responsible for handling my workload full-time, as he won't be able to find a replacement student before my contract officially concludes. I must clarify that my actions are solely directed towards him and him alone. Whenever a call pertains to the responsibilities of my other coworkers, I diligently fulfill my duties as usual.